Alright, so let's get started on this series. Let's get rolling. So we're having a look at page 3. It doesn't say 3, it's just I at the bottom of the page. But anyway, we're having a look at the chapter The Minstrel's Legacy from William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed. So let's see what it says. I mean, are these videos based on a trustworthy, reliable source? I guess we're answering that question in this video. Let's get into it. The minstrel left the most extensive account of the life of Wallace. He claimed that his epic poem was derived from a Latin manuscript composed by Wallace's chaplain, the Benedictine monk John Blair. His purpose was to broadcast Blair's biography of Wallace to the common people, to preserve his memory. He feared that the story would eventually be lost if only preserved in its Latin form. Therefore, he translated Blair's original Latin account into the Scottish vernacular of his day. Besides allowing literate Scots the freedom to read the life of Wallace in their own language, the minstrel created an opportunity for the non-literate majority to hear, and perhaps learn in verse, Blair's account. Opinion is divided, some saying that Blair's manuscript never existed, while others believe it did, but that it is now lost. The minstrel claimed that Thomas Gray, the parish priest of Liberton who assisted Blair in its composition, had been, like Blair, an eyewitness to Wallace's deeds. He said that Blair's account was written at the instigation of a third witness to many of Wallace's actions, William Sinclair, the Bishop of Dunkeld, who wished to send the finished manuscript to the Pope. So right away we're getting the impression that Henry the Minstrel really is ahead of his time, because remember, this is before the advent of the press and all this sort of thing when you can mass manufacture materials. This predates that by several centuries. So this is pretty smart on the part of the minstrel, if this is true. I mean, he's thinking way ahead of his time, you know. Somewhat of a genius, I would suggest, you know. I was about to say in my opinion, but unless you qualify it otherwise, everything that comes out of your mouth is your opinion. So obviously in my opinion. But, you know, yeah, so this pretty much makes it based upon a contemporary source, upon a primary source. I don't think you could go as far as to argue that Henry the Minstrel was a primary source, but he was using primary sources. I mean, I've been on both sides of academia. I've wrote dissertations before. I know how to write academic essays. In fact, I enjoyed it, you know. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. I like writing. So let's continue. Some have discredited the minstrel's history, calling it a xenophobic rant against all things English. That criticism is invalid. I would have to agree 100%. It's not xenophobic at all, having read this book. The simple fact is that Scotland's enemy was the King of England, a fact beyond the minstrel's control. Yeah, this work is very anti-King Edward, you know, and the policies of King Edward, but it's not anti-English. Those are separate things, because England's had many rulers and kings and leaders, just as Scotland has. And some of those leaders are reprehensible and some of them are good. You know, a nation often is only as good as its leadership, you know, at least its leadership, you know, in terms of the administration or government or whatever, the court, but certainly only as good as the one who's on top, you know. So England under King Edward was, you know, not a very pleasant place, I would think. I don't get that impression, but there's other leaders of England I could say that about, but without getting too sidetracked. But there's been good leaders as well of England, and like I said, that applies to every country. But let's continue. This is the minstrel, he urges his fellow Scots to remain on guard against an imperialist policy which had already subjugated both Wales and Ireland, and continued to be a cause of great concern to the rulers of France. The minstrel equally censures those Scots who helped Edward bring Scotland to its knees. In contrast, several passages are in praise of Englishmen who act with valour on the battlefield, whilst he is unstinting in his praise for the bravery displayed by the English Archbishop, who sternly opposed Edward's tyranny, Winchelsea. And this is true. Having read this book, like I said, there are times when Henry the Minstrel does praise certain Englishmen who, do brave and heroic things. Like one example, slight spoiler here, but one example is the Earl of Kent, for example, who, fights to defend Edward because he was Edward's brother. There's one particular battle that goes down where the Earl of Kent was taking the Scots on, like, head on, and like he was the only thing that was stopping the whole battle from turning into a total rout. And once he went down, the whole thing just collapsed. So like I said, one man can make a difference. One leader can make a big difference, and does make a big difference. Let there be no mistake about that. This book definitely proves it, and not only William Wallace, but other leaders as well. Let's continue. Thomas Chambers, who wrote The History of the House of Douglas, indicated that he had read John Blair's Latin document when he wrote of particular events that took place during the life of Sir William Douglas. Quote, "These things happened in the year 1298. The passages which tell of his actions at the time of Sir William Wallace are either passed over or slenderly touched upon by the writers of our chronicles, although the truth of the matter is unquestionable, as they are related by those eyewitnesses who wrote the history of Sir William Wallace in Latin, which was paraphrased into English rhyme by Henry the Minstrel, who expressed the main body of the story very truly. However, he differs by a slight degree from the Latin, missing or mistaking some circumstances." And just kind of a little side note there from the video I did about the origin of Clan Crawford, Wallace's maternal ancestors. The Douglases and the Wallaces were distantly related to each other, kind of like cousins sort of thing, because they all kind of go back to Thorlongus and like his descendants. There's a few clans in Scotland that are descended from the same ancestor as Wallace, and that's Thorlongus, the Anglo-Danish chief. So check that out, that video as well. But let's continue. From what Chambers has written, we might reasonably conclude that he had possession of, or access to, the original Latin history, and could therefore compare it with the Minstrel's account. Carrick wrote, "We also find, when we examine the statistical account of Scotland, that the localities mentioned in Henry's poem are given with a precision beyond the reach of a blind man, thus indicating that the Minstrel translated from an eyewitness's account." So again, is this an authentic source? Only evidence is pointing in that direction. Yeah, very authentic and contemporary as well. Because it's easy to confuse place names because they change over time. If you're lucky, they've still got the same place name as they did 700 years ago, but things like vowels and things can be interchangeable sometimes. Like, for example, Edinburgh wasn't always spelt the way it is now. I've seen like very old kind of prints of Edinburgh where it's spelt like Edinburgh, like E-D-E-N, borough, sort of thing. So you have to bear that in mind. Okay, so let's continue. This man, whose true identity remains elusive. Just making sure the microphone's on, because sometimes I record and forget to turn it on. But anyway, this man whose true identity remains elusive not only translated the Latin of Blair and Gray's eyewitness account, but left us with a work that could not have been translated, or could not have been authored even, by a blind man. Some say in argument that Milton was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost, but the great historian Hilaire Belloc proved that was not the case, and that Milton had written his work before the onset of blindness. I mean, the whole idea that somebody who's blind can write a poem is just kind of ridiculous. Surely I don't need to explain that. You know, it's like the whole thing about it being Blind Harry who wrote it. You know, that sounds like an interpolation, like an effort to discredit the source from. I can't possibly imagine who would have a motive to do that. But anyway, let's continue. Later, we shall present plausible arguments to suggest that the appellation Blind Harry is in fact a misnomer. What can be said of this man is that he must surely be considered as the father of the modern novel. Critics have questioned the authenticity of the minstrel's dates. Those rare instances in the later printed edition texts where his dates are suspect may be due to mistakes by several copyists or printers' errors that during the passage of time have corrupted the original text. Yeah, that can happen very easily. I mean, like I said, I've graduated from university. I've been on both sides. Academia, I've taught it, and I've been a student. Mistakes can be made very easily. I've done it myself. You know, this is why you always have to cite your sources when you're writing anything academic. That's the reason. And there's a reason, by the way, why they don't accept Wikipedia well, on the subject. You know, you actually have to go to actual sources, you know, because if Wikipedia was an option, everyone would be doing it. And in fact, you can actually get things from books which are not on the internet. I know this from having been a tour guide. You know, there are things written in books that you never find online because information can get corrupted or lost over the course of time. You know, one edition might have something, and the next edition they might have edited it out or replaced it with something else. So, yeah, it's not easy, like studying history with any kind of. You always have to kind of cross-reference everything, you know, because anyone can say anything, you know. But you have to have like multiple sources that are kind of going through this, and there are different books that I've got just off to the side here that, you know, talk about Wallace. So I'm not just relying on one book, but this is like my favourite source. But I do have others like James Mackay's Braveheart and Freedom's Sword, and I've got several books on Robert the Bruce as well, and general history texts like the Scotichronicon. I've got that as well. But you know, even amateur historians like myself have favourites. You know, because I graduated with a history degree. It's up there on the shelf. Anyway, let's get back to this here. The Minstrel presents a tale that arguably compares in stature to any of the works of Chaucer or Shakespeare, both of whom he preceded. Yet even those who dismiss the authenticity of his story have withheld the praise that the quality of his writing deserves. Elements of this story have been read and continue to be read by millions who remain unaware of the source, little realizing that the tales of Robin Hood are derived from the life of perhaps the bravest warrior knight who ever lived, Sir William Wallace of Elderslie. Whatever attitude the reader takes when digesting the minstrel's work, whether regarding it as being derived from an authentic story of William Wallace or treating it as the original tale of Robin Hood, one cannot fail to be impressed by the power of his words. So the authors here who wrote this book are really putting over Henry the Minstrel as being up to the level of Shakespeare and Chaucer. Well, might be a slight amount of bias involved there. But I don't know if I quite go that far, but you know, it's all very pro Henry the Minstrel. It's putting him over, you know. I wonder kind of, here's the thought, because I'm thinking like of all the actors who've played Robin Hood. I think one of them was actually Sean Connery. I wonder if Big Sean, before he passed away, R.I.P., the original and best James Bond, I wonder if he ever knew that the character he was playing, Robin Hood, was actually William Wallace. I remember he was in the 1990 or 1991 film with Kevin Costner where he played Richard the Lionheart. But the thing about Robin Hood is it's probably derived from several different myths, not just the story of Wallace on its own. It's probably a composition of different stories, you know, to be completely fair. But, you know, nobody really knows, like, what the exact timeline's meant to be. And, like, a lot of folk stories and all this, you can interpret it different ways, you know. I've watched several Robin Hood films, like the one I referred to with Kevin Costner. That was my favourite. I haven't seen Men in Tights, I have to admit, but the Ridley Scott one it was just kind of like almost like a repeat of Gladiator. Like he's trying to bring back the glory of Gladiator again in another setting, you know. But Russ is just playing the same role again. It seems like, you know, Russell Crowe. I mean, yeah, I enjoyed it, but I don't think it was anything really particularly special. I think, you know, because the one in 1991 wasn't taking itself very seriously. You know, it was just fun. You know, you were allowed to have fun with it, whereas, you know, the Ridley Scott movies of late seem to be a little bit repetitive and preachy, but that's just my opinion. I liked Body of Lies though. I thought that was pretty good. For one thing, you had Russell Crowe not playing Maximus all over again. But anyway, let's go down to the next little page here. So this is from Henry the Minstrel himself. We should read about our ancestors and learn of their noble and worthy deeds. We lose things of importance through laziness and look to things less important. Giving and showing respect to Englishmen seems to be our intent nowadays. This has been the behaviour of Scots in recent times towards our old enemy England, that has never, and even yet, would never do Scotland any good. This should be like on the SNP headquarters or something, you know? Should have this framed. Or the new Alba party or something, you know. But, you know, Henry the Minstrel's very emotional about this, you can tell. He really means it, what you're saying. But as if necessary to them, sorry, it's kind of the way the text is written, it's not easy to read. I'll try that again. But as if necessary to them, they always seem bent on mischief, this being well known by many. Because of their mighty pride, they have always longed to hold Scotland under forevermore. But God above has made their power fail. Even yet we should give thanks to God for one of our ancestors. I beseech all worthy men that read this book, do not scorn me if it is not perfect. I should be praised, since I have not spared myself in its undertaking. For all my labour earned me no money from king or lord. I thought it would be a tragedy if the good deeds of Wallace should be forgotten. I have written as accurate an account of his life as is within my power. It was written neither for friendship nor to offend, and has caused no man to be indebted to me. But there is a mistake for which I am not to blame. The blame lies with two knights, Wallace of Craigie and Liddell, who furnished me with information that was in error. According to my author John Blair, Wallace accepted the crown of Scotland for one day on Allerton Moor. The two knights had me mistakenly right that it was otherwise. Henry the Minstrel, Anno Domini 1361. So yeah, William Wallace was the King of Scots for one single day. And we'll talk about that when we roll round to that much later on down the line. So who was the greatest of all the kings of Scotland? Well, let me throw one name into the hat which is rarely suggested. William Wallace. You know, he was the true Braveheart. You know, he was the true king. You know, there's kind of shades of Jon Snow with William Wallace if you're into like Game of Thrones, like the whole thing about who the real king should be, you know, and is and all that sort of thing. But we'll get into that in the future. But yeah, thanks for watching, and be sure to leave your thoughts and comments below.